It's reframing of, instead of trying to be the best, it's just trying to be better, right? It's just trying to be better, whether it's as a partner, as a worker, as a manager, as a leader, as a friend, right? It's just, how do you be better? Not try to be the best, because that's some weird, unattainable, megalomaniac, egotistical goal, but rather, how do you just be better?
And welcome back, everyone. This is David on the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. And today I am here with Nithya. Nithya, how you
Hi,
doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I just told you we're just talking about parent-teacher interviews and all that fun stuff. The managing children and home and work and all that just never ends, does it?
Yeah, it's like having kids adds just a layer of logistics that you didn't know that you wanted in your life.
It's a good excuse to get out of work early too, right?
I
So,
mean, there's your hot tip for the day, right? Oh, I got to do daycare pickup. It's like, David, I thought your kids were in high school. Like,
Dave,
what do
it's
you mean?
Saturday. It's a PA day today, isn't it? Like, no. Oh, wonderful. Hey, Nithya. So, how about I give you the mic for 30 seconds to introduce yourself to everyone listening?
Yeah, sure. So, hello, listeners. Hello, internet world. Excited to be here with you today. My name is Nithya Ramachandran. I'm president and chief strategy officer of a sponsorship marketing agency called T1, based in Toronto, Canada. I'm always excited to talk to folks about leadership and what that looks like. I think, especially as somebody from an underestimated audience on so many levels. I've had the immense, not just luck, but opportunity to have become, a VP at an agency at 33, and then lead an agency at 35. And I think, that comes with a lot of different paradigms of diversity or dimensions of diversity in a really beautiful way, but also what that means to kind of navigate that world and kind of find that inner strength, I guess, as cheesy and as cliched as that sounds, but kind of find that confidence to navigate and not just be presented with those opportunities, but seize those opportunities as well.
Okay, we'll talk about seizing opportunities and such today, and kudos to you for achieving so much at 30 something, right? I think I was still drawing with crayons at the time, so you, and so you like to say underestimated populations.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I'm curious why the word underestimated, and
Mhm.
how that factors into what you think about leadership.
Yeah, so underestimated audiences was a term coined by Miles Worthington down in the US. He has his own consultancy and agency as well. And I just feel like it's the perfect summation of how to describe this audience that isn't the kind of hetero, cisgendered white man in North America, as it were, because the other terms just never felt like they fit. Like, minority, we're not really a minority anymore. We're the global majority. We're not marginalized. We're not in the fringes of anything or of culture. Like,
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, if you think about, especially in the US, a lot of Black and Brown people are the ones that form and are at the forefront of culture. So marginalized doesn't feel
Mhm.
great. Underrepresented, perhaps. But the reason I really gravitated towards this term that Miles came up with underestimated, is because it also links really beautifully to business impact. When you're
Mm.
thinking about a business objective, you're thinking about a marketing objective, people are talking about ROI. They're talking about return on investment. They're thinking about what is the bottom line impact. And underestimated is a beautiful term because it not only philosophically kind of represents who
Mhm.
we are, in terms of not fitting this specific box that these systems we've been created for, but it also hits a really black and white kind of balance sheet terminology where it's you're underestimating these audiences, therefore you're not discovering the full potential of how that could be hitting your bottom line as well. And by authentically connecting with these different communities, it's better for your business, period. So I like the term a lot because it's a different way of thinking about it, but it also takes away this victimization
Mm-hmm.
subtlety that's in a lot of these words: underrepresented, minority,
Yeah.
marginalized. It's like, how do we kind of take some of that power back?
Yes. I guess why does this word resonate with you?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's like I was saying, the really nice hit to conversations around hitting the bottom line of you got
Mm-hmm.
to estimate these people in order to get the ROI. And then I think the other part is it's not a victimizing
Yeah.
tone or language. It's really about how we're taking our power back. Of you're underestimating me. That is your problem, not mine. And I think it's
Uh-huh.
shifting the power dynamic with such a simple term.
Yeah. So give people the power back. Stop victimizing yourself. You're not marginalized. You're underestimated. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what does that allow now? When you are taking back the power, how does that help you project yourself into the world?
That's a great question. I think it helps with changing the narrative in your mind, right? Like a lot of times, especially in like women in leadership circles, people talk about imposter syndrome, and it's a term I really hate and I really dislike. And I always say
I noticed
unsubscribe.
that.
Yeah, I was like, unsubscribe to the
why
term
why do you hate it
imposter
so
syndrome.
much? Why do you hate
You
it so
know,
much?
I think it's for this exact same kind of reason, right? Like, one, when I started hearing the term imposter syndrome, I was like, what is that? Like, I never personally identified with the term because I joke, I have a lot of confidence. I very much recognize that. I recognize that's somewhat of a unique thing. I also
Mm-hmm.
make the joke that, I have the confidence of a mediocre white man in the corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
That's, we've all met those people, right? But I find a lot of times when I chat with women, younger women that are like recent grads, especially folks from underestimated audience, they're always like, how do you deal with imposter syndrome? And I was like, what is this thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the unfortunate thing, and now, like in the last year or so, a lot of like psychologists and scholars are starting to unpack this term, right? Because essentially everybody, whether you're a leader, you're in the workforce, whatever, every person will always have fears, will have doubt, will have
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty. That's a really natural human response.
Yeah.
But essentially, what's happened is that response has become pathologized, right? And instead of thinking about this as an issue of the system that we're in, people think it's an issue that they have to solve for themselves. So there's a really great New Yorker article by Leslie Jamison, and she talks about this. But Dr. Raquel Martin calls imposter syndrome a justified reaction to an oppressive environment, right? So if we think about the corporate world as a world that was not, or a system or a world or an environment that was not created with us in mind, right? Of course, we're going to have fear and doubt, but we're saying then that's the issue of the people and not the issue of the system, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I hate the term because, again, it takes the power away from people. It's like, you don't belong here. You're not justified in being here.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to be here. We will tolerate your presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's not what the world is anymore, right? I think if that was the case, I would not be in the role that I'm in. I would not be talking to you right now, right? It's this idea of how do we shift the narrative, the conversation, for people to realize that sure, they're being underestimated in these rooms, but that's not your problem. That's their problem, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let's walk through this then.
Yeah.
You for everyone listening out there, imposter syndrome, what you're saying is that it's not you, it's them. Them as in it's the system. It's
Mm-hmm.
not because you don't belong, it's not because you don't have the skills. It's it's a consequence of how you are reacting to the environment around you.
Yeah,
Can
and
we agree on
and
that? Yep. Yep. Is that right?
100%. And those feelings of doubt and fear are natural feelings, human emotion. That doesn't mean that you're an imposter.
Yes. And I think I want to pause on that too. It is a natural feeling. And for anyone listening out there, it is a natural feeling. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're an automaton or a robot, you're going to feel something.
Mm-hmm.
And so because you're feeling it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means you're
Exactly.
responding to an external, you want to get scientific, some external stimuli,
Mm-hmm.
and you're responding to it either through
Mm-hmm.
a stress response or something else.
Mm-hmm.
And now, okay, so let's walk through this. You have the power back. You understand it's not you, it is an environment. Now, how would you now go about saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do about it?
Mm. And that's always the hardest thing, right?
Because
I
what I
think,
don't want people to stop there is like, well, it's
yeah,
not me, it's you. Well, you got to mold yourself to me.
yeah,
How many relationships fall apart because of that, right? It's like, no, no,
yeah,
no, no.
yeah,
It's my way. That's it.
yeah.
Because I don't want people to stop there. You
No,
still got to take ownership of the problem.
1000%. And I think it's just a matter of like, that is step one, right? Recognizing that you exist in an environment that might not be built for you. So there's a couple of things, right? You got to learn the rules of the game in order to change the rules of the game, right? Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
we've all had maybe a coworker, somebody we've managed that's like, I don't want to play the game. I don't want to do these things. And you're like, okay, but you gotta understand what you're trying to navigate first. So like understanding your surroundings is really important. And then I think it's really trying to think about how you show up with intention. I think it's thinking about, again, we keep talking about like power, like taking the power back, which can sound cliched, but I think in order to get that and think about how do I want to show up, right? So I know that I exist within this environment, right? I think there are some people that will need to exit that environment if it really is like
Yeah.
toxic for them. And that's something that is, if you have the privilege to do that and you can find another job, for example, do that. And I've had the privilege where I've had to be able to find another job because I was in a toxic environment. But I think the other thing is if you've decided that this is an environment that you can navigate, that you can potentially thrive in, I think for folks, the first exercise to do really is to have that reflection, that sit down of how do I want to show up, right? How do I want to show up as a leader, as a teammate, as a contributor to this organization? And these are the things that I get out of it. So understanding your motivations of why you want to be there, that could be straight up cash, like, hey, I need to make money to pay my bills. That's why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
That could be ambition, that could be a sense of accomplishment, whatever your sense of purpose is, right? And then thinking about how do I show up in order to achieve that purpose. So
Yeah.
it's centering you in your own conversation. It's kind of, that joke about like main character energy. It's like become the main character, but you got to
Mm-hmm.
understand that there's a story around you. There's still a movie that's happening around you.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
become the main character?
Yeah. And to your point around, well, first of all, like you're in this environment, you acknowledge it. Now you got to do something about it. And something could be leaving the environment
Mm-hmm.
if it is very toxic for you, and um, whether this is a workplace or a relationship, you got to make that choice. Is this something I need to just cut bait and walk away from? So you got to
Mm-hmm.
make that choice, number one. And number two is that if you choose to stay, you cannot have the attitude of, well, I don't play politics,
Yeah.
but you're in a 1,000-person company. If you're working with another human, there will be things called politics. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose not to quote unquote play the game, you will suffer the consequences. Or if you're a leader, your team will suffer the consequences. And
Mm-hmm.
so you got to choose. If you're going to stay on the court, metaphorically,
Yeah.
you got to play the game. And
Yeah.
if you don't want to play the game, get off the court.
Exactly.
So, and I've heard this throughout my career many times, like, oh, I don't kiss ass. Like, well, no one's asking you to,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if your boss is someone who craves the spotlight and you want more resources and trust from them, you got to give them an opportunity to look good
Yeah.
so that your team can do well too. And
Yeah.
if you're not willing to do that, then get off the court. So
Yeah, and
I,
and that's not a bad thing, right? Like I've left jobs because, they might have started off great, but
mhm,
eventually I was like, this does not align with who I
Yes.
am or where I want to go, because we all, like to your point, we all evolve as humans, as people,
Yeah.
right? And where you start in a company in a year or two or three, or a good old pandemic happens in the middle, like your values might change, your purpose might change, your
Yep.
priorities might change and shift. And sometimes it's like, this is not meshing anymore. I need to move on to the next
Yeah,
thing.
and that's the point I was trying to get across, is that
Yeah.
you got to make a choice if this is aligned to your values or not. But if you're choosing to stay with this, you got to do something about it and not be, like a player on the court that's not playing, right?
Yeah.
And
Just
so,
standing there. Yeah.
yeah, you're just standing there, right? And an extreme example with talking about politics, but there's always some element of that, no matter what, like
Hmm.
they're in every organization. So, um, I guess when you look at empowerment, like who do you talk about underestimated, right? But who are you trying to help? Like practically, like when you help go out and help talk about this, there's got to be specific populations you're looking at, right?
Sure.
People you're looking
Sure.
at, right? Who do you focus on?
I think, well, for me personally, I am one of my big values is around equity, not equality. Not that I don't value equality, that sounds so bad, but is around
It's okay.
equity, right? How do we, in order to get to a place of equality, equity is the thing that's important, right? So, how do we support and buoy up the folks that need it the most? And I think for me, and it is a bias, right? I'm trying to help people that look like me and might have a specific or similar lived experiences, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when I focus on like mentorship or programming like that, I focus on women of color a lot of times because I'm trying to help them get a leg up in the world. And I don't know, I'll be honest, I don't know if it was the panini, what I lovingly call the pandemic as a trauma response. I don't know if it was the panini. I don't know if it was because a lot of young women in like university were in high school were in Zoom classrooms, didn't have the interaction, didn't get the like opportunities with like student groups and
Mm.
internships and whatnot. I feel like a lot of the conversation has been around this timidness. And I don't mean timidness from a personality perspective. I mean from a uncertainty perspective in
Mm.
a I don't know how to navigate the world. And so they're
Mm.
lobbing on maybe to these terms like, oh, well, it's because I have imposter syndrome. And it's like, well, but do you even know what that is? Like,
Yeah, you
why are you
labeled
just,
yourself, right? And you
yeah,
victimized yourself.
yeah, by
And it's
calling
like,
yourself an imposter.
yeah, and no, but it's because I'm an imposter. And remember what we were just talking about at the beginning.
Yeah,
Stop there.
yeah,
I labeled myself, I diagnosed myself with something, and
yeah,
I'm just who I am. And it's
yeah,
presumed that you can't change. And that's, well, we know where that goes. That's the proverbial Ted Bundy and Married with Children talking about his football days. He's like
yeah.
50 something. And sorry, that's a really old reference, but
Yeah.
um,
Hey, it's
it's the
Ted
old guy talking
Bundy's.
about his high school football
Yeah,
days and
yeah,
the
yeah,
glory
yeah,
days of when I was 17 and playing football. And yeah, but what have you done about it since
yeah,
then? Have you
yeah.
have you evolved? And
Exactly, right? Yeah, so to your point, it's I like the way that you said that. It's right by giving yourself a label, you stop, right? You're limiting yourself, you're stopping yourself, and it's like, how do you open that up? This is like the nerdiest reference ever, but in the like spin-off series for Harry Potter,
yep,
the Beast series that they have, they
we're
had a
having
little
fun with
monster.
this. I
Oh my
love it.
God, you know what? I love that.
We're talking about
Um,
shows, and I think I referenced the wrong Bundy now. Jeez,
you
whatever.
did. You absolutely referenced the
I'm
wrong
going to edit
Bundy.
that out because, yeah, you know who I was talking about, right?
Yeah, I
So,
was going to say Pam Bundy's the haircut is
uh,
iconic, but you
good God,
definitely referenced the wrong
you know
Bundy.
what the hell? You know what? I will self edit this because that was like, okay, carry on.
All good. Okay, so my Harry Potter story. So Harry Potter spin-off movies, the Beast series, there was three of them. In one of the movies, there's this like little creature that kind of looks like a dragon snake, right? It's cute.
Yeah.
They're trying to find it. But the really unique thing about this little beast is that it conforms to the box that it's within. So to trap it,
Hmm.
they trapped it in a teacup because it became the size of the teacup.
Hmm.
When it was let out of the teacup, it filled up an entire building.
Mm.
So the reason I love that image so much when we're talking about things like potential and labels and stopping yourself is because by giving yourself some weird label or and calling yourself a certain thing, you're putting yourself in this teacup, in this like little itty bitty space, and you can only grow that much. So
Hmm.
how do you bust the lid off of it so that you can kind of unleash your potential? That's so cliche, but like unleash your potential and bust out of the spaces that you have been placed in these constraints and these boxes that you've been in. How do you grow and adapt and make yourself kind of bigger, right, in those
Yeah.
spaces?
Yes.
But I love that scene so much, and I always go back to that a little bit of like, what box are you putting yourself in? Is it the teacup or is it the building?
I love that metaphor, and it's way better than the one I used. So, when you think about being underestimated, how have you been underestimated in your life?
I mean, like I gave the facts before about like the age thing. So like ageism, absolutely there. Like also I'm melanated. I look younger than I am. I like to think. So like you walk in rooms, people think you're younger. So like literally that will be the thing. Like
Yeah.
I'll meet people and they're like, okay, who is she? Then they'll hear the title and be like, oh, okay.
Hmm.
So age is definitely a thing. Being a woman is definitely being a thing. Being somebody like racialized, definitely a thing. And then there's the intersection of all of that. So it's a multiplier, right?
Hmm.
But like I said, I don't know where this came from, but this is where like I have the confidence of a mediocre white man. I don't care. And I think that has been the biggest thing for me when people are like, well, you're from these audiences. Are you under, how do you deal with this? I'm like, it's literally not part of my consideration set anymore. The example I'll give you is in one of my previous roles, I had a client meeting. We went to an agency partner. There were 25 people in this room.
Hmm.
25 people. I was not only the only woman, I was also the only racialized person in this entire room of 25.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're doing this presentation. It's like, people from the US, people from Canada, it's a big corporate meeting or whatever.
Yeah.
And at one point, my managing partner, lovely man, turns over to me and he like kind of looks around and he's like, pardon my French. He's like, oh shit, like, are you cool? Like, cause he finally took a scan of the room and realized what was happening.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah, no worries. I have no problems. And I put my hand up and asked a question about, their
Yeah.
balance sheet or something. Right. For me, like that to me is the perfect example of like, cool. I'm in these rooms where other people underestimate me because of so many different things where my managing partner, bless his heart, from an empathetic place, did lean over and try and check up on me. But
Hmm.
until he did that, I didn't even realize that I
Yeah.
was the only woman, the only racialized person, the like one of the younger people in the room,
Yeah.
because I just came with, I am here because I am supposed to be here, because I have literally a seat at this table. I am owning this seat at this table and I am
Yeah.
showing up who I am because of my skill set, because of my expertise. And I'm just going to be here because I decided that's how I want to show up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so what is your formula for that? For those listening out there who
Mm,
may be more conscious of
mm,
the environment and where they're in, and more conscious of like, oh, maybe I might screw up, and oh, maybe, right?
yeah. Yeah.
And catastrophizing some folks.
Absolutely.
What's your formula for breaking through that, and at least taking a first step towards that
Absolutely.
level of confidence?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to two things. It's courage and it's community. Those have been the two kind of pillars that have really shaped my leadership practice. And I call it a practice because we give people this term of leaders, but really leadership is an infinite amount of small decisions every single day that you have to make, right? So
Yeah.
in my leadership practice, it comes down to those things. And the reason I use courage over bravery is that when you look at the definitions, bravery is acting without any fear. There's
Hmm.
no fear, it's instinctual. You just kind of do it, right? But why courage is such a powerful term for me is that you are acting in spite of that fear,
Yeah.
right? You are making an intentional, conscious choice to act in spite of uncertainty, in spite of doubt, in spite of fear.
Hmm.
So it's really a matter of how do you cultivate that courage in order to take those intentional actions every day, right? And as women, there's a lot of things that you have to contend with. We're taught from a young age to be perfect, right? Instead of being good enough, right? Instead of
Mm-hmm.
having progress over perfection, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
those are big things that a lot of folks have to deal with, like from a young age, right? But even as racialized individuals, like model minority myth is a really big thing that holds a lot of folks back, because you have to try and reach these elements of perfection before you can do anything. And I think that holds a lot of people back, instead of being able to show up, iterate, evolve, collaborate, like do things in real time and make mistakes, right? So courage, I think, and being able to cultivate that, I think, is super important. And then the other side of it for me is around community. I've never really had a boss that's been able to identify with my lived experiences. And because of the industry I'm in, I don't even have that many peers that are able to, identify with my lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's all about community. And that's the group chats, that's the brunch dates, that's the like too long FaceTime calls, that's the frantic phone calls that you make to friends, to coworkers, to whatever. But like, I have a group chat that I rely on almost every day. And we talk about being good partners. We talk about motherhood. We talk
Mm-hmm.
about work. We talk about how to navigate certain situations. And
Mm-hmm.
that to me gives me a lot of insight and wisdom and advice in order to act with courage on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. So this does lead to the next question then. How do you cultivate that courage?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways of doing that. I think, my advice always is when you're trying to restart or start this journey in any way, is one, figuring out what kind of leader you want to be. How do you want to show up? So it's an exercise I did when I took on this role of president, and it's something I revisit often. I literally sat down during my honeymoon, funnily enough, but my husband was taking a nap, and I was like, okay, I'm going back to this job, taking over this role. What does that look like? And I wrote out what kind of leader I want to be. How do I want to show up for myself and for my team?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gave me a bit of a blueprint of, okay, these are the qualities, the adjectives, the things that I want to live by in this role. And it acts as a really nice grounding kind of cheat sheet for me, but it also helps me with decision making, right? So if I need to make a tough decision, I can go back to that and reference it of, how do I make this decision? How do I communicate this decision? How do I have empathy for other people as well based on that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think another way here is that idea of like progress over perfection, right? Sometimes you just got to be like Nike and do it, right? I think a lot of times where a lot of folks have like analysis paralysis, and they kind of
Mm-hmm.
stop from doing things because they're trying to get something perfect. But again, if we go into this idea of, you might never be perfect in somebody else's eyes, right? Especially if you're underestimated, especially if the system doesn't think you're supposed to be there. Sometimes you just got to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to iterate, you got to like design by doing, see what's kind of out there, and learn from maybe some of those situations that it might not have been quote unquote perfect. And I think another part of this is really about the reframe. Instead of thinking what's going to go wrong, oh God, I totally messed this up. Instead of thinking about things from a failure catastrophizing perspective, as you put it, I love that term.
Mm-hmm.
It's reframing it of like, how do I think of this as a learning opportunity? So it's more of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, if this doesn't hit the mark, what have I learned from it? How can I grow from it? What are the opportunities? And I think that starts kind of like rewiring your brain a little bit to then act with courage, because you're not thinking about this from just like a worst case scenario perspective.
Yeah, yeah. What do they think about me? Blah 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 blah. And oh, what if this
Hmm.
happens? And the what if, and soon
Yeah.
they find out it's 3 a.m. in the morning and they still haven't slept, and they
Yeah.
actually did nothing about the problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The deck is
Uh,
still sitting on their desktop.
yep.
Exactly.
Maybe you just get your shite done. None of those catastrophes would actually come true.
Yeah.
Um, So, knowing what you know now, if you had to go back to an earlier version of Nithya and give her
Hmm.
advice, what would you tell her?
I would actually tell her to lead with more vulnerability. and show up with more vulnerability. And I think, part of having courage, part of being able to cultivate a community is also by showing the cracks, by being honest about what you really think. I
Mm-hmm.
think, because of things like model minority, because of maybe first child syndrome, all of these things, all these labels that we put on
Labels. Yeah. More
ourselves,
labels.
all labels, right? All labels. Early parts of my career, I always thought of myself of having to be the strongest one there, the hardest worker. I had to somehow become the smartest person, learn as much as possible, but always be kind of this rock for everybody else. I always
Yeah.
had to be the rock of the team. I had to always break my back. If it's not done, you know what, I'll stay up till 3 in the morning and get it
Mm-hmm.
done,
Yeah.
instead of demonstrating a bit more vulnerability of, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm really running ragged. Can you help me out here? Right? Like demonstrating that there are not necessarily, it's not cracks, they're not weaknesses, they're opportunities for growth, right? In being able to simple things like delegate, like learn something new, right? Different opportunities for growth. And I think for me, that led to a lot of burnout, that led to a lot of, adding to a toxicity of environments as well. And
Yeah.
so for me, I think that would be the biggest advice is like, when we talk about like showing up authentically to work, we hear that a lot as another cliche now. But for me, I think the advice that I would give is be more vulnerable, be more like a person. You don't need to be a rock, right? You
Yeah.
don't need to be everybody's foundation. What's supporting that foundation as well, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that would be the advice I'd give.
Yeah. Yeah. Be human.
Be a real person. Yeah.
Nothing ever rattles Nithya. All
Yeah,
right.
but that's the kind of mantra in my head of like, all right, I gotta be the one, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's changing that self-talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And uh, it's uh, it's amazing what how some it's almost like you feel the weight of responsibility is only on you.
Yeah,
And one thing you learn is that comes from a place of ego as well.
yeah, absolutely.
If not me, then who?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Actually, a lot of other people. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
you're replaceable. I'm replaceable.
Yeah.
All of us are replaceable. Quite frankly, if we left our jobs today, we'll be replaced. Dare I
Mm-hmm.
even say, if I left my job as in my relationship, I'd be replaced. Right? Everyone is replaceable,
Yeah.
and it's a good way of thinking of things. And we don't want that to happen,
Mm-hmm.
especially on the relationship side. Um, but if we think about that, we actually you let go of a lot of things and realize
Mm-hmm.
actually not this is not all on me. In fact, if I give this to someone else, I give them an opportunity
Yeah.
to have the same growth opportunities.
It's reframing of, instead of trying to be the best, it's just trying to be better, right? It's just trying to be better,
Yeah,
whether it's as a partner, as a worker, as a manager, as a leader, as a friend, right? It's just, how do you be better? Not try to be the best, because that's some weird, unattainable, megalomaniac, egotistical goal, but rather, how do you
yeah,
just be better, right?
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I've talked to folks before, and they say, "Oh, I have no ego," and we're talking about for 30 minutes like how they're trying to shoulder the responsibility of a project and do everything, and they go, "But I have no ego," and you know that's an ego. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm how's that an ego? You think you could do it all, and they never
Yeah, it's
thought
the
of it that
same
way.
people that say they're really humble.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah.
same people.
I'm really humble, but when I was hanging out with all these celebrities last
Yeah,
night, oh,
yeah, 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 yeah,
quite a burden.
yeah.
Humble brag,
Yeah, yeah.
name
Humble
drop.
brag. That's an oxymoron.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Um, Last question to you. Um, what is one question that I should have asked you during this podcast?
That is a hard question.
Everyone gets stumped by this one.
I know it's a good one. I'm going to stall for time here. But it's really similar to an interview question that I really love asking that stumps everybody. This is a total tangent as I try and stall here. But in every
Sip your
interview
coffee.
that I do,
Sip
yeah,
your
exactly.
coffee. Yeah.
in every interview I do, the very last question I ask people is, what's the most interesting thing about you that's not on your resume? And it
Yeah.
almost stumps everybody, but it's a great question.
Ah.
What question should you have asked me? Um, Ooh, because you're gonna ask me the question. That's why I'm also like, do I be strategic? Maybe what the source of my confidence is? Maybe that's an interesting question.
So Nithya, what's the source
Nice.
of it? So Nithya, what's the source of your confidence?
Listen, see, I knew this is where you were going. You're just trying to get me to do your job for you. No, I'm kidding. Great, great question, David. I think for me, I often reflect on this question because I always make that joke of, I have the current confidence of such and such person. Um, I think for me, I think part of its nature, I think part of its nurture. I think I innately was born with a certain level of confidence, and now that I have a new baby that is literally not even a year old and has the biggest personality, I'm like, yes, I see the science behind this.
Mm-hmm.
There is like some natural confidence that folks are born with, but I think for me, the nurture part of it came from my dad. He was the guy that, when we were kids, my mom and dad loved throwing parties, right? So the house would always be full of people. And he would always make me and my sister go and say hi to every single auntie and uncle that walked
Mm.
into the house. And, we call everybody auntie and uncle,
Yep.
regardless if they're related or
Yeah, I
not.
know.
But so he would make us go say hi to every single person. My sister didn't love doing that. But for me, I'd be like, oh, yeah, I would ham it up, right? We'd go and say hi to everybody. We'd have like little dance parties. And I think even now, like even then when I was growing up, anytime we were at like family friends' house, dinner parties, like especially in our culture, like the aunties and uncles sit separately, but I
Mm-hmm.
would never be afraid of like going and having a drink with the uncles, sitting there,
Mm-hmm.
chopping it up with them. And so I think the nurture elements of that, of, my dad really like pushing it to make sure that we were like outgoing and had our own confidence. I think that was the nurture side of it that helped like kind of remove some of those barriers of like, it's not scary to say hi to an auntie or uncle. They're in your house, they're a friend, they're part of your community.
Yeah.
And I actually think that was also the first uh, times that I was able to bear witness to what strong community really looked like as well,
Mm.
in a big way.
All right. Well, thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you, Nithya.
thank you.
So, if anyone wants to find you and
Yeah,
learn more about what you're up to,
yeah.
how can they do that?
Yeah, they can follow me on LinkedIn. My name is hard, but it's Nithya Ramachandran. So you can find me on LinkedIn, or if you search up Nithya and T1, you should be able to find me on the internet. But LinkedIn's a great place.
All right. Well, Nithya, thank you very much. It was a wonderful time I spent with you. Thank you for sharing all that knowledge.
No, thank you, David. It was fun to be here. This fun fact is my very first podcast. So appreciate you
I
for
would
that.
not have known. Well, you've done a lot of public speaking and such. And
Sure.
yeah, so yeah, this is a drop in the bucket for you.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Nithya, I'm going to end the recording.